Welcome to Planet Time, where we explore the wonders of the Earth and universe in a calm and soothing way. I am so glad you are here with us today for something really special, a journey that's going to take us deeper than humans have ever gone before, into one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios I have ever come across. What if there's an entire advanced civilization living right beneath our feet, deep in the Earth's mantle? I wonder what the weather's like where you are right now. Maybe you are looking outside at trees swaying in the wind, or watching rain streak down a window, or perhaps it is one of those perfectly clear days where the sky seems to go on forever. Whatever it is, I want you to think about something for a moment. You are standing on what feels like solid, permanent ground. But here's the thing that always amazes me. That solid ground you are on. It is actually just a thin shell, like the delicate skin of an apple, floating on top of something that's, well, it is almost unimaginably different. Have you ever cracked open a hard-boiled egg? You know how there's that thin white shell on the outside, and then inside there's this completely different world of yellow yolk and clear white? That's basically what we are living on. The Earth's crust, everything we know, every mountain, every ocean, every city, it is just that thin shell. And beneath it, there's a whole other realm that's so vast and so alien that it might as well be another planet entirely. We call it the mantle, and it makes up about 84% of our planet's volume. Think about that for a second. Everything you've ever seen, everywhere humans have ever been, every story that's ever been told, all of that has happened on less than 1% of what Earth actually is. The rest is this mysterious, molten world where rock flows like honey and pressures are so intense they could crush a car into a marble. But here's what really gets me thinking late at night, and maybe this has crossed your mind too. What if we are not alone down there? What if something incredible has been happening in that hidden realm all along, completely separate from our surface world? Now, I know this might sound like pure science fiction, and in many ways it is. But you know what's fascinating? The more we learn about the actual science of the Earth's interior, the more we realize that the impossible might not be quite so impossible after all. Scientists have discovered vast oceans of water trapped in mantle rock, more water than exists in all our surface oceans combined. They found evidence of complex chemical processes, strange forms of crystalline structures, and conditions that, while extreme, might not be completely hostile to life as we know it. And then, there are those moments, maybe you've had them too, when you are walking somewhere familiar, maybe in your own neighborhood, and you suddenly become aware of just how much mystery is literally under your feet. On Bend. All those miles and miles of rock and heat and pressure, stretching down further than we can even properly imagine. It is like living your entire life on the deck of a ship, without ever wondering what's happening in all those rooms below. The deepest humans have ever managed to drill is about 12 kilometers. That's roughly 7.5 miles. Sounds pretty deep, right? But to reach the center of the Earth, we'd need to go 400 kilometers. So we've basically scratched the surface. It is like trying to understand the ocean by dipping your finger into a shallow puddle. This makes me think about all those ancient stories our ancestors told, myths about underworld kingdoms, about gods and spirits living in the depths, about entire civilizations existing beneath the surface. The Greeks had their stories of Hades. The Norse talked about multiple worlds beneath Midgard. Native American traditions speak of the ant people who lived underground and helped save humanity. Were these just stories, or were they something else? Maybe they were humanity's way of intuiting something we are only now beginning to understand, that the Earth is far more complex and mysterious than what we see on the surface. And you know what I find really beautiful about this idea? It is not just about whether there actually could be a civilization living in the mantle, though we'll definitely explore that fascinating possibility together. It is about what thinking about this does for us. It reminds us that we are part of something so much bigger than our daily experience. it makes us appreciate the incredible world we do live on. And maybe, just maybe, it helps us feel less alone in the universe. I have been working on this exploration for months now, diving into everything from the latest geological discoveries to ancient mythology, from the physics of extreme environments to the psychology of what it might mean to live in such a radically different world. And I have to tell you, every piece of research has made me more fascinated, not less. The science alone is mind-blowing. Did you know that the mantle isn't actually molten liquid like most people think? It is more like, imagine the thickest honey you've ever seen, but it is made of rock, and it is hot enough to melt copper. It flows, but incredibly slowly. We are talking movements that take thousands of years. And the pressure down there? It is like having the weight of 24 elephants pressing down on every single square centimeter. Yet somehow, in conditions that seem completely impossible for life, we keep finding that life finds a way in places we never expect. Then there's the engineering challenge aspect, which honestly keeps me awake sometimes just thinking about it. How would you even begin to build a civilization in an environment like that? How would you create energy systems, communication networks, living spaces? What would their technology look like? Would it be anything we'd recognize, or would it be so adapted to their environment that it would seem like magic to us? And the cultural questions are just as fascinating. How would a civilization that developed in complete darkness think about light and color? How would beings that live in a world of constant, slow movement understand concepts like permanence or stability? Would they even have the same sense of individuality that we do, or would they think more collectively? Would their concept of time be completely different from ours? These are the kinds of questions that make science feel like poetry to me. They are questions that do not just expand our knowledge, they expand our imagination and our sense of what's possible. Now, I want to be clear about something. This isn't going to be one of those videos where I try to convince you that there definitely is a mantle civilization, or that the government is hiding evidence, or anything like that. What we are doing together today is something I think is even more valuable. We are using our imagination and our curiosity as tools to explore real science, real possibilities, and real questions about our planet and ourselves. We'll look at what we actually know about the Earth's interior, and trust me, the real science is every bit as amazing as any fiction. We'll explore how life manages to survive in the most extreme conditions we know about. We'll dive into those ancient stories and see what they might tell us about human intuition and imagination. And yes, we'll let ourselves wonder about what it would really be like if there was a completely different kind of intelligence that had evolved in the depths of our own planet. I think there's something beautiful about approaching mysteries this way. Not to solve them necessarily, but to appreciate them, to let them teach us something about wonder and possibility and the sheer incredible complexity of the world we are part of. So, if you are enjoying this gentle exploration into one of Earth's deepest mysteries, I'd love it if you could help our sleepy little signal find its way to other people who might be wondering about this too. There's something special about sharing these moments of curiosity with others, isn't there? Right now, I want you to get comfortable wherever you are. Maybe adjust your position, take a slow breath, and let yourself settle in. We are about to begin a journey that's going to take us from ancient myths to cutting-edge science, from the psychology of extreme adaptation to the philosophy of deep time. We are going to imagine civilizations that think in geological timescales, explore the engineering challenges of building in molten rock, and consider what wisdom might come from existing in harmony. It is going to be a fascinating ride, and I am so glad you are here to take it with me. Let's begin our journey to Earth's hidden heart. Right now, as you are sitting there listening to this, you are perched on something truly extraordinary. The ground beneath your feet might feel solid and permanent, but the reality is far more incredible than it appears. You are essentially sitting on a thin shell, a delicate crust, floating on an ocean of molten rock that stretches for thousands of kilometers below. Think about that for a moment. The solid Earth we walk on every day is really just the outermost skin of our planet. It is like living on the shell of a hard-boiled egg, completely unaware of the vast, hot interior that lies beneath. And when I say thin, I mean remarkably thin. The continental crust averages only about 35 kilometers thick. That might sound like a lot, but consider this. If Earth were the size of an apple, our crust would be thinner than the apple's skin. What's beneath that skin is where our story really begins. Below the crust lies the mantle, a layer of hot rock that makes up about 84% of Earth's volume. It is a world so alien, so different from our surface experience, that it might as well be another planet entirely. And yet, it is right there, just beneath our feet. We humans are curious creatures, aren't we? We've always wanted to know what lies beyond the next horizon, what's hidden in the depths of the ocean, or what secrets the darkness holds. So naturally, we've tried to dig down and see what's there. The deepest we've ever managed to drill is about 12 kilometers into the Earth's crust. That's the Kola super deep borehole in Russia, a project that took over 20 years to complete. 12 kilometers sounds impressive, doesn't it? But here's the thing that'll give you perspective. If you wanted to reach the center of the Earth, you'd need to go down 371 kilometers. That makes our deepest drilling achievement look like barely scratching the surface. We've made it roughly 0.2% of the way to the center. It is like trying to understand an entire ocean by dipping your toe in the water. So how do we know anything at all about what's down there? Well, Earth itself gives us clues. Every earthquake sends seismic waves rippling through the planet, and these waves behave differently as they travel through different materials. It is similar to how you can tap on a wall and tell if it is solid or hollow based on the sound. Scientists have been listening to these earthquake taps for decades, slowly building a picture of what lies beneath. What they've discovered is fascinating. The mantle isn't the molten lake of fire that many people imagine. Instead, it is made of rock that's so hot and under so much pressure that it behaves in ways that seem almost magical. The rock down there flows like honey, incredibly slowly, but it does flow. This isn't the liquid rock you see pouring out of volcanoes. No, this is something much stranger. Imagine heating honey until it glows white hot, then putting it under pressure equivalent to having 24 elephants standing on every square centimeter. That's what mantle rock is like. It is technically solid, but over thousands and millions of years, it moves and flows in massive, slow-motion currents. These currents are what drive the movement of continents across Earth's surface. The very ground you are standing on is riding on these impossibly slow rivers of rock. The temperatures down there are beyond anything we experience on the surface. Even at the relatively shallow depth of 100 kilometers, temperatures reach about 300 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt copper instantly. As you go deeper, it only gets hotter. By the time you reach the bottom of the mantle, temperatures soar to around 40 degrees Celsius. For comparison, that's about 2/3 the temperature of the sun's surface. And the pressure. Well, that's something else entirely. At the top of the mantle, the pressure is about 24 times what we experience at sea level. At the bottom, it is more than 1,000,000 times atmospheric pressure. These aren't conditions that life, as we know it, should be able to survive in. And yet, that's where our imagination begins to run wild, isn't it? Because if there's one thing we've learned about life on Earth, it is that it has an amazing ability to survive in places we never thought possible. Deep in the ocean, around volcanic vents where water reaches temperatures that should kill anything, we find thriving communities of bizarre creatures. In rocks miles beneath the surface, we've discovered bacteria that seem to eat stone and breathe sulfur. So when we look down at that vast, hot, high-pressure world beneath our feet, a tantalizing question emerges. Could something be living down there? Could there be life forms so different from us that they thrive in conditions we can barely imagine? This question has captivated human imagination for centuries. Long before we had any real scientific understanding of what lay beneath the Earth's surface, people were spinning tales of underground kingdoms and hidden civilizations. The ancient Greeks told stories of Hades, the underworld realm of the dead. Norse mythology described multiple worlds layered beneath our own. These weren't just random stories, they reflected a deep human intuition that there's more to our planet than meets the eye. The scientific revolution didn't kill these ideas, it transformed them. As we learned more about Earth's structure, writers and thinkers began to wonder, what if there really were vast spaces down there? What if there were creatures, or even civilizations, adapted to those extreme conditions? Jules Verne captured this perfectly in his novel Journey to the Center of the Earth. Published in 1864, it told the story of explorers who discovered a vast underground world filled with prehistoric creatures and incredible landscapes. The book was science fiction, of course, but it was grounded in the geological knowledge of the time. Verne wasn't just telling a fantasy story. He was asking a genuine scientific question. What might we find if we could actually journey to the center of the Earth? What makes these questions so compelling isn't just their audacity, but how they make us think about life itself. We tend to assume that life needs the same conditions we do: moderate temperatures, breathable air, liquid water, solid ground to stand on. But the mantle challenges every one of these assumptions. It is a place where rock flows like water, where pressure could crush any surface creature instantly, where temperatures would vaporize most materials we know. And yet, when we really think about it, isn't that exactly the kind of environment where evolution might produce something truly extraordinary? Life on Earth's surface has had billions of years to adapt to our particular set of conditions. What might billions of years of evolution produce in an environment as radically different as the mantle? The more we learn about the mantle, the more intriguing these possibilities become. Recent discoveries have revealed that there's actually water down there, lots of it. Not liquid water as we know it, but water locked in the crystal structure of minerals under extreme pressure. Some scientists estimate there's more water stored in mantle minerals than in all the oceans combined. This discovery changes everything. Water is the universal solvent, the medium where chemistry happens most easily. If there's water in the mantle, even if it is in a form we've never seen, then there's the possibility for the complex chemistry that life requires. So as we begin this journey together, exploring the possibility of civilization in Earth's mantle, we are not just indulging in fantasy. We are asking fundamental questions about the nature of life itself. We are wondering whether intelligence and culture could arise in conditions so alien that they are barely within our ability to imagine. The mantle represents the ultimate frontier, not in outer space, but in inner space. It is a world more foreign than Mars, more mysterious than the deepest ocean trenches, and it is right here beneath our feet. Every step you take, you are walking on the roof of the most extraordinary world imaginable. In our exploration ahead, we'll journey into this alien realm. We'll imagine what life might look like there, how civilizations might develop, and what we might learn from beings who have adapted to such extreme conditions. We'll discover that the journey to Earth's hidden heart isn't just about geology or biology. It is about understanding the incredible creativity of existence itself. The ground beneath your feet holds secrets that could reshape everything we think we know about life in the universe. And our journey to uncover those secrets starts right now, with our first step into the depths of Earth's hidden heart. So here we are, standing on what feels like solid, unchanging ground. But the truth is, we are actually perched on the thinnest possible crust, floating above an environment so extreme, it makes the surface of Venus look like a pleasant vacation spot. Let's talk about pressure first, because it is honestly hard to wrap your head around. Down in Earth's mantle, you are dealing with pressures that start at about 24 gigapascals and climb all the way up to 136 gigapascals as you go deeper. Now, I know those numbers do not mean much by themselves, so here's a way to picture it. Imagine having the weight of 24 full-grown elephants pressing down on every single square centimeter of your body. That's just at the shallow end of the mantle. And that's not even considering the heat. We are talking about temperatures that reach 40 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt copper, silver, even gold. At those temperatures, solid rock doesn't stay solid. It becomes plastic, flowing like thick honey, moving and churning in currents that take millions of years to complete their cycles. You'd think nothing could possibly survive in conditions like that. I mean, we humans start getting uncomfortable when it is just 40 degrees outside, and we need special equipment to handle pressures that are a tiny fraction of what exists in the mantle. So how could any form of life possibly exist down there? Well, here's where things get really interesting. Because life has this incredible habit of showing up in places where we are absolutely certain it cannot exist. We keep discovering what scientists call extremophiles, organisms that not only survive in conditions that would kill us instantly, but actually thrive there. They are like nature's ultimate survivors. Take the bacteria we've found living near volcanic vents on the ocean floor. These little guys are happily going about their business in water that's hot enough to cook an egg, surrounded by chemicals that would be toxic to most life forms. And that's not even the most extreme example. We found microorganisms living in the radioactive water of nuclear reactors, in salt crystals that have been buried for millions of years, even in the vacuum of space. So when we start thinking about what might be possible in the mantle, we have to remember that life has already proven it can adapt to conditions we thought were absolutely impossible. The question isn't really whether life could theoretically exist down there, it is what form that life might take. Now, here's something that'll really blow your mind. We've discovered that there's more water trapped in the rocks of the mantle than exists in all of Earth's oceans combined. Think about that for a second. All the water you've ever seen, every ocean, every lake, every river, that's just a tiny fraction of the water that's actually on our planet. The vast majority is locked away in mineral structures deep below us, in conditions of pressure and heat that transform it into exotic states we are only beginning to understand. This changes everything when we think about the possibility of mantle life. Where there's water, there's potential for the kind of chemistry that makes life possible, even if it is water unlike anything we are familiar with on the surface. But what would that life actually look like? Well, it certainly wouldn't look like us. The carbon-based life we are familiar with, our DNA, our proteins, our cellular structure, all of that breaks down under the extreme conditions of the mantle. So we have to start thinking about entirely different kinds of biology. Scientists have proposed something called plasma-based life, organisms that could exist in the superheated, electrically charged environment of the deep Earth. Instead of the chemical reactions that drive life on the surface, these beings might run on electrical processes, their consciousness emerging from patterns of electromagnetic activity in the flowing rock. Then there's the possibility of silicon-based life. Silicon is abundant in the mantle, and under those extreme conditions of pressure and temperature, it might be able to form the complex structures that carbon creates in our surface world. Imagine beings whose bodies are essentially living crystal, growing and changing in harmony with the geological processes around them. It is hard to even picture what such creatures might be like. They'd exist on timescales that dwarf human experience. What we consider a lifetime might be just a moment to them. Their thoughts might move as slowly and powerfully as the convection currents that carry them through the Earth's interior. They might not have individual bodies as we understand them, but exist as part of larger, interconnected systems that span hundreds or thousands of kilometers. The more we learn about extremophiles on Earth's surface, the more we realize that life might be far more adaptable than we ever imagined. We found organisms that can repair massive amounts of radiation damage to their DNA, bacteria that can essentially go into suspended animation for millions of years and then wake up when conditions improve, microorganisms that can survive being frozen, boiled, and subjected to the vacuum of space. If surface life can pull off feats like that, what might be possible for life that evolved specifically for the mantle's conditions? Life that never had to deal with our surface world's limitations, but instead adapted over billions of years to harness the incredible energies available in the Earth's interior. These hypothetical mantle dwellers wouldn't need sunlight. They'd have access to geothermal energy on a scale we can barely comprehend. They wouldn't be limited by solid surfaces. They could swim through rock, riding the convection currents like dolphins in an ocean of molten minerals. The crushing pressure that would destroy us might be as natural to them as air pressure is to us. And here's something that really gets me thinking. What if consciousness itself could take forms we've never imagined? Our brains rely on electrical signals moving through neural networks. But in the mantle, with its intense electromagnetic fields and flowing, conductive materials, maybe consciousness could emerge from entirely different processes. Maybe intelligence could arise from the interaction of magnetic fields, or from patterns of pressure waves moving through the plastic rock. The truth is, we are only just beginning to understand what life is capable of. Every few years, scientists discover organisms living in conditions that were supposed to be sterile, thriving in environments that should have killed them. Each discovery expands our understanding of what's possible, pushing the boundaries of where and how life might exist. So when we imagine civilizations in Earth's mantle, we are not just engaging in fantasy. We are extrapolating from the incredible adaptability that life has already demonstrated, pushing those possibilities to their logical extreme. And in a universe full of extreme environments, from the crushing depths of Jupiter's core to the radiation-blasted surfaces of distant exoplanets, understanding how life might adapt to Earth's mantle could help us recognize it in places we never thought to look. The mantle represents the ultimate test of life's creativity. If consciousness can emerge from the flowing rock beneath our feet, if intelligence can arise from plasma and pressure and temperatures that melt stone, then truly, life might be possible anywhere in the universe. And that thought, that we might be sharing not just our planet, but our very footsteps with forms of intelligence beyond our current imagination, well, that changes everything about how we see our place in the cosmos. The question we are left with isn't whether such life is possible, but whether we are clever enough to recognize it if it is there. Because if there are minds thinking thoughts in the molten depths below us, they are probably unlike anything we've ever encountered. And maybe, just maybe, they are wondering about us too. You know, it is fascinating that we are sitting here in the 21st century, seriously considering what life might be like in Earth's mantle. But here's the thing, we are not the first to wonder about what lies beneath our feet. Not even close. Humans have been imagining civilizations in the deep places of the Earth for thousands of years. And when you really think about it, that's pretty remarkable. Long before we had any scientific understanding of what's actually down there, long before we knew about tectonic plates or convection currents, our ancestors were telling stories about entire worlds existing beneath the ground we walk on. It is like we've always had this collective intuition that there's more going on below us than meets the eye. Take the ancient Greeks, for instance. They didn't just imagine an empty void beneath their feet. No, they populated it with an entire realm called Hades, not just a place of the dead, but a complex underworld with rivers, kingdoms, and powerful beings who ruled over vast territories. The god Hades himself wasn't just some minor deity tucked away in a corner somewhere. He was one of the big three, ruling a domain that was every bit as important as the heavens or the seas. And think about what that suggests. The Greeks understood on some level that the underground realm was huge, vast enough to contain all the souls who had ever lived, complex enough to have its own geography, its own politics, its own power structures. They weren't imagining a simple cave system. They were envisioning something that rivaled the surface world in scope and importance. Now, you might say, well, that's just mythology. They were trying to explain where people go when they die. And sure, that's part of it. But there's something deeper going on here. Something that shows up again and again across cultures that had no contact with each other. The Norse had their own version of this intuition. In their cosmology, there wasn't just one world, there were 9 of them, and several existed beneath Midgard, which was their name for our surface world. They imagined entire realms below us, each with its own inhabitants, its own purposes, its own complex relationships with the world above. These weren't simple stories about caves or burial grounds. These were sophisticated cosmologies that treated the underground as a place where intelligence thrived, where complex societies existed, where important things happened that affected life on the surface. And here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at Hindu and Buddhist traditions, you find incredibly detailed descriptions of multiple layers of existence beneath the earth. Not just vague references to an underworld, but specific, elaborate maps of subterranean realms. They described entire civilizations living in these deep places, beings with their own forms of wisdom, their own technologies, their own relationships with the fundamental forces of existence. The level of detail in these ancient texts is almost startling. They talk about different types of beings adapted to different underground environments, about cities built in caverns so vast that they contain their own weather systems, about forms of light that didn't come from any sun we'd recognize. It is like these ancient traditions were doing exactly what we are doing right now, using their imagination to populate the vast unknown spaces beneath their feet. But let's travel to a completely different part of the world and see what we find. Native American traditions, particularly those of the Hopi people, tell stories about the Ant People, underground beings who saved humanity during catastrophic periods in Earth's history. According to these legends, when the surface world became uninhabitable, these underground dwellers provided shelter and guidance to human survivors. Now, that's a pretty specific narrative, isn't it? Not just there are beings underground, but there are intelligent beings underground who have the technology and wisdom to help surface dwellers survive disasters. It suggests a sophisticated understanding that underground environments might actually be more stable, more protected from the chaos that periodically disrupts surface life. And when you consider what we now know about the mantle's role in regulating Earth's climate over geological timescales, these ancient stories start to seem almost prophetic. But perhaps the most intriguing underground civilization stories come from Tibetan traditions. The legends of Shambhala and Agartha describe not just underground cities, but advanced kingdoms with technologies and spiritual practices far beyond anything on the surface. These weren't primitive cave dwellers in the traditional stories. These were highly evolved civilizations that had chosen to live beneath the earth. According to these traditions, the underground kingdoms weren't hiding from the surface world out of fear or isolation. Instead, they were deliberately maintaining a different way of life, one that was more in harmony with the fundamental forces of the planet. They were portrayed as guardians of ancient wisdom, keepers of knowledge that surface civilizations had lost or never developed. Think about that for a moment. Here we have ancient traditions suggesting that the most advanced civilizations might be the ones that went deep, instead of reaching for the sky. While surface cultures built upward toward the heavens, these legendary underground societies built inward, toward the heart of the planet itself. And there's something almost haunting about the consistency of these stories. Whether you are looking at Greek myths or Norse cosmology, Hindu texts or Native American legends, Tibetan traditions, or dozens of other cultural narratives from around the world, you find this recurring theme: intelligent life thriving in the deep places of the earth. These stories didn't emerge in isolation. They developed independently in cultures separated by vast distances and centuries of time. Yet, they share remarkably similar elements, underground realms that are not just inhabited, but that host complex, advanced civilizations. Beings who have adapted to life in conditions that surface dwellers would find impossible. Technologies and wisdom traditions that are specifically suited to deep earth environments. It is as if humanity has always carried this collective memory, this shared intuition that Earth's depths aren't empty. That there's intelligence down there, waiting to be discovered or communicated with. Now, you might wonder, why did our ancestors spend so much time imagining life beneath their feet? Why didn't they focus all their speculation on what might exist beyond the stars or across distant seas? Part of it might be practical. The underground was mysterious, but accessible. You could dig down, at least a little way. You could explore caves. You could see that the earth had depth, even if you couldn't fathom how much. The depths were unknown, but they were known to be there. But I think there's something deeper going on here, something that connects to our modern scientific speculations about mantle life. These ancient myths might reflect a fundamental human understanding that life is incredibly persistent, incredibly creative, that it finds ways to exist in places that seem impossible. Our ancestors might not have known about extremophile bacteria or the physics of high-pressure environments, but they understood something essential about life itself, that it doesn't give up easily, that it adapts, evolves, finds ways to thrive in conditions that would destroy other forms of existence. And maybe, just maybe, these ancient stories are humanity's way of acknowledging something we've always suspected on some level. That we are not alone on this planet. That intelligence might be more widespread, more adaptable, more persistent than we imagine. When we consider the possibility of a mantle civilization today, we are not just engaging in scientific speculation. We are continuing a conversation that humanity has been having for millennia. We are adding our voice to an ancient chorus of wonder about what might be happening in the vast hidden spaces of our world. The difference now is that we have tools our ancestors couldn't have dreamed of. Seismic imaging, pressure physics, extremophile biology. We can make educated guesses about what conditions actually exist down there, what forms of life might theoretically be possible. But in some ways, we are asking the same questions our ancestors asked. We are still wondering if intelligence has found a way to exist in Earth's hidden places. We are still imagining civilizations that have adapted to conditions we can barely comprehend. We are still looking for signs that we might not be the only thinking beings on this planet. And like those ancient storytellers, we are discovering that the more we learn about the deep earth, the more mysterious and wondrous it becomes. Every answer we find seems to open up 3 new questions. Every discovery makes the mantle scene not less magical, but more so. These ancient whispers from below, these stories that have echoed through human culture for thousands of years, they remind us of something important. The universe is vast and strange and full of possibilities we haven't even begun to explore. And some of the most amazing possibilities might be right here, right beneath our feet, closer than we ever imagined. Because maybe our ancestors were onto something. Maybe their intuition about underground civilizations wasn't just fantasy or wishful thinking. Maybe it was a glimpse of something real, something that's been waiting down there all along, living and thriving and thinking thoughts in the deep, patient darkness of the mantle. After all, the best stories often turn out to be true. They just happen in ways we never expected. You know, there's something almost magical about how writers of science fiction seem to peek around the corner of time, catching glimpses of truths that scientists will not discover for decades. It is like they are explorers with time machines, imagining territories that we later find out actually exist. Take Jules Verne, for instance. Back in 1864, when most people thought the Earth was probably solid all the way through, he wrote Journey to the Center of the Earth. Now, Verne got a lot of things wrong. There's no hollow cavern down there with dinosaurs roaming around prehistoric forests. But here's the thing that gives you chills. He understood that the deeper you go, the stranger and more wonderful things become. Verne described this world where the normal rules do not apply, where heat and pressure create conditions unlike anything on the surface. He imagined vast underground seas, which seemed completely fantastical at the time. And yet, here we are today, discovering that there might be more water trapped in the Earth's mantle than in all our oceans combined. That's not exactly what Verne pictured, but it is pretty close to magic, isn't it? Then there's Edgar Rice Burroughs, the guy who gave us Tarzan. In the early 1900s, he created this whole series called Pellucidar, stories about a civilization living on the inner surface of a hollow earth. Burroughs imagined people who lived in eternal daylight from an inner sun, in a world where gravity worked backward. It was pure fantasy, sure, but he was grappling with the same question we are exploring. What if there's an entire world beneath our feet? What's fascinating is how these writers weren't just making things up randomly. They were responding to something deep in human consciousness, this intuition that the earth holds secrets, that there's more going on down there than meets the eye. And you know what? They were right, just not in the way they imagined. Because here's where it gets really interesting. Modern science has revealed that the Earth's mantle isn't empty, but it is far stranger than any science fiction writer ever dreamed. We are talking about rock that flows like thick honey, about pressures so intense they squeeze carbon into diamonds, about temperatures that would melt steel in seconds. It is a world that operates on completely different rules from ours. Let's talk about what we've actually discovered down there, because reality has turned out to be more bizarre than fiction. There's this region called the transition zone, sitting about 410 to 660 kilometers beneath your feet. That might not sound like much, but remember, that's deeper than humans have ever gone, deeper than we've ever even tried to go. And in this transition zone, something remarkable happens. Pressure down there is so intense that water cannot exist the way we know it. Instead, it gets trapped inside the crystal structure of minerals, locked away in forms that do not exist anywhere on Earth's surface. We are talking about water that's not wet, water that's been squeezed into the very atoms of rock. It is like nature found a way to hide an ocean in plain sight. And how do we know this? Well, sometimes the Earth gives us clues. Deep diamonds, the ones formed hundreds of miles down in the mantle, occasionally make their way to the surface through volcanic eruptions. And when scientists crack these diamonds open, they find tiny inclusions of water-bearing minerals. It is like receiving a message in a bottle from the deep earth, telling us about vast reservoirs of water we never knew existed. Think about that for a moment. We've spent centuries exploring every corner of our planet's surface, mapping every ocean and climbing every mountain. But right beneath our feet, there are underground seas that dwarf all the water on the surface. It is humbling, really. Here we are, thinking we know our own planet, when most of it remains as mysterious as an alien world. This is where science fiction writers showed their genius, even when they got the details wrong. They understood that the Earth is not what it appears to be on the surface. They sense that there's something more, something hidden, something that challenges our everyday understanding of reality. And in a way, they were preparing us for discoveries that seemed impossible at the time. You see, science fiction doesn't really predict the future, so much as it expands our sense of what's possible. When Verne wrote about underground oceans, he wasn't making a scientific prediction, he was stretching our imagination. He was saying, what if the world is bigger and stranger than we think? And that, what if turns out to be incredibly important? Because here's the thing about scientific discovery, it often happens when someone is willing to imagine the impossible. The scientists who first proposed that water could exist in the mantle were building on decades of speculation, much of it coming from writers and dreamers who dared to think beyond the obvious. There's this beautiful pattern throughout history where imagination leads the way, and science follows. Science fiction writers like Verne and Burroughs weren't just entertaining people. They were preparing humanity for a larger universe, a more complex Earth, a reality that's far more interesting than it first appears. And this keeps happening, over and over again. Writers imagine submarines decades before they are built. They dream up space travel centuries before rockets. They picture communication across vast distances long before we have telephones or radio. It is as if the human imagination is constantly reaching toward truths that our current knowledge cannot quite grasp yet. So when we think about the possibility of an advanced civilization living in the Earth's mantle, we are participating in this same tradition. We are using our imagination to stretch beyond what we currently know, to consider possibilities that seem impossible, but might turn out to be true in ways we cannot yet understand. The mantle civilization idea might seem completely fantastical now, but then again, so did underground oceans just a few decades ago. So did the idea that rock could flow like liquid, or that diamonds could carry messages from the deep earth. Reality has this wonderful habit of being more creative than our wildest dreams. Maybe that's why these stories never really go away. Even as science advances, and we learn more about what's actually down there, we keep coming back to the idea of hidden worlds, secret civilizations, intelligence adapting to impossible conditions. Because deep down, we understand that the universe is full of surprises, and most of them are hiding in plain sight. The earth beneath our feet isn't hollow, filled with dinosaurs and inner suns. But it is something arguably more wonderful, a dynamic, flowing, incredibly complex system that's been operating for billions of years, creating and recreating itself in ways we are only beginning to understand. It is a world where water exists in forms we've never seen, where rock behaves like liquid, where the impossible becomes routine. And who knows? As we continue to explore these depths, as our technology gets better and our understanding deepens, we might discover things that make today's science fiction look like yesterday's scientific fact. After all, the best stories often turn out to be true. They just happen in ways we never expected. And sometimes, they are even more amazing than when we think about living underground. Our minds often jump to cramped bunkers or dark caves. But what if we are thinking about this all wrong? What if an entire civilization could thrive beneath our feet, developing ways of life so different from ours that we barely recognize them as human? Let's start with something real, something we can actually visit. Deep beneath the rolling hills of Cappadocia in Turkey lies a city that'll make you question everything you think you know about underground living. Derinkuyu isn't just a cave or a basement. It is an entire civilization carved into rock, descending 18 levels deep into the earth. We are talking about a place where 20,000 people once lived, worked, raised families, and built a complete society underground. Think about that for a moment. 20,000 people. That's not hiding, that's living. And they weren't just surviving down there, they were thriving. They had ventilation systems so sophisticated, they could cook without smoke escaping to the surface. They had rolling stone doors that could seal entire sections. They had chapels, schools, wine cellars, and even spaces for their animals. This was a city that happened to be underground, not an underground hiding place that became a city. Now, imagine scaling that way up. Instead of 18 levels carved into soft volcanic rock, picture an entire civilization existing in the flowing, plastic rock of Earth's mantle. The principles that made Derinkuyu work, cooperation, resource sharing, three-dimensional thinking, would become the foundation for something unimaginably vast. You see, when you live underground, everything changes. Not just the obvious things like needing artificial light or dealing with limited space. The very structure of society shifts. In Derinkuyu, privacy as we know it barely existed. People lived in interconnected chambers, shared common areas, and depended on each other for literally everything. Your neighbor wasn't just someone who lived next door. They were part of your survival system. This is where our imaginary mantle civilization gets really interesting. In a world where resources are scarce and every cubic meter of livable space is precious, individual achievement starts to matter less than collective success. You cannot really be a loner when the air you breathe depends on a ventilation system maintained by hundreds of other people. You cannot hoard resources when everyone's survival depends on perfect distribution and recycling. It is like the difference between living in a sprawling suburb and living on a submarine. In the suburbs, you can close your door, ignore your neighbors, and pretend you are self-sufficient. On a submarine, every person's actions affect everyone else. The civilization that would develop under these conditions wouldn't just look different from ours, it would think differently. Let's dive deeper into what this might actually mean. In our surface world, we organize ourselves around individual families, personal property, and private spaces. We value independence, personal achievement, and the freedom to go where we want, when we want. But what if physical reality made all of that impossible? Picture a society where the very concept of going somewhere else doesn't exist. In the mantle, there's no elsewhere to go, no other city across the ocean, no wilderness to escape to, no new frontier to explore. Everyone you'll ever meet lives in the same interconnected system. Every decision affects everyone, and everyone's decisions affect you. This would create what we might call a submarine mentality, but taken to an extreme we've never experienced. In this world, reputation wouldn't just matter, it would be everything. You couldn't escape a bad decision by moving to another town. You couldn't start over with new people. The person you are today is the person you'll be known as for generations. Think about how that would change human nature itself. The impulse to deceive, to cheat, to take advantage of others, these behaviors work in our world partly because we can escape their consequences. But in a closed system, where everyone depends on everyone else, trust becomes not just valuable, but absolutely essential for survival. And here's where it gets really fascinating. On the surface, we live by solar rhythms. Day, night, seasons, years. Our entire sense of time is tied to Earth's rotation and orbit. But in the mantle, there are no days. There are no seasons. There's only the slow geological pulse of the planet itself. A mantle civilization would think in geological time. Their seasons might be the million-year cycles of mantle convection. Their years could be the time it takes for heat from the core to travel through their region. Imagine planning not just for your children's future, but for changes that will not happen for 1,000 generations. Imagine building something knowing that its effects will not be seen for millennia. This brings us to something beautiful and strange, how such a civilization might experience reality itself. We surface dwellers are obsessed with up and down. We climb mountains to feel successful. We talk about falling down when we fail. But in the mantle, directions become fluid. Up and down lose their meaning when you are floating in a world of flowing rock. The very concepts of higher and lower disappear. Instead, navigation might be based on currents, the slow rivers of molten rock that flow through the mantle like an ocean in slow motion. Imagine giving directions, not by saying go north or turn left, but by saying follow the iron current toward the cooling zone or ride the thermal plume until you reach the pressure ridge. Your entire sense of space would be three-dimensional in a way that we surface dwellers can barely comprehend. We live on a flat plain with occasional hills and valleys. They would live in a truly spherical world, where every direction is equal, where down might lead to cooler regions, and up might lead to hotter ones, but neither is inherently better or worse. This would reshape not just how they navigate, but how they think about relationships, hierarchy, and social organization. Without clear up and down, how do you organize a society? Maybe you'd think in terms of center and edge, or hot and cool, or fast current and slow current. And then there's the question of art. How do you create beauty in a world without light? How do you make music when sound travels through rock instead of air? Their entire aesthetic sense would be built around things we barely notice: texture, vibration, temperature, magnetic fields. Imagine art that you experience by touching different temperatures of rock, or music that you feel as patterns of vibration through your body. Their equivalent of a beautiful sunset might be the sensation of riding a thermal current that's been building for centuries. Their poetry might be patterns of chemical signals that tell stories through taste and smell. Communication itself would be revolutionary. In our world, so much depends on sight, facial expressions, body language, written words. But in complete darkness, surrounded by flowing rock, they develop ways of communicating that we cannot even imagine. Maybe they'd speak in chemical signals, like incredibly sophisticated versions of how ants communicate. Maybe they'd use patterns of vibration, turning the rock itself into a communication medium. Picture this. Instead of sending a text message, you create a pattern of small movements that travels through the rock as seismic waves. Your friend, hundreds of kilometers away, feels these vibrations and understands not just your words, but your emotional state, your exact location, and maybe even what you've been eating. The rock itself becomes their internet, their telephone system, and their emotional support network all rolled into one. The social structures that would emerge from this are mind-boggling. Leadership wouldn't be about standing tall or being the loudest voice in the room. It might be about being the most sensitive to the subtle communications flowing through their world, or being the best at coordinating the complex cooperation needed for survival. Maybe their leaders would be chosen not for their ambition or charisma, but for their ability to think in geological time, to make decisions that will benefit the community not just today, but for thousands of years into the future. Imagine having leaders who plan not for the next election cycle, but for the next ice age. This is where our surface civilization starts to look a bit frantic by comparison, doesn't it? We rush through our days, planning weeks or maybe years ahead, constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly consuming. From a mantle perspective, we might seem like insects, busy, energetic, but living such short lives that we barely have time to understand the consequences of our actions. But here's what's beautiful about imagining this. It is not really about whether such a civilization could exist. It is about what thinking about it reveals about us. When we picture beings who must cooperate perfectly to survive, who think in geological time, who create art from temperature and communicate through vibration, we start to see both the limits and the possibilities of human adaptation. We start to realize that the way we live now, our individualism, our rush, our separation from each other and from the planet, isn't the only way to be human. It is just the way we've adapted to the particular conditions of Earth's surface. But humans are incredibly adaptable creatures. We've survived ice ages, created agriculture, built cities, and learned to fly. Who's to say we couldn't learn to thrive in conditions that seem impossible? The real magic of imagining a mantle civilization isn't in the technical details of how they'd survive the pressure and heat. It is in recognizing that intelligence and consciousness might flourish in ways we've never considered, creating forms of beauty, wisdom, and community that would expand our understanding of what it means to be alive. You know, there's something beautifully human about our relationship with the unknown depths beneath our feet. We've always known something was down there, even when we had no way to prove it. And the stories we've told ourselves about what might exist in those hidden spaces? They've evolved right alongside our understanding of science itself. If you think about it, we've been imagining civilizations beneath the earth for thousands of years. But the fascinating thing is how these ideas have transformed from pure mythology to religious cosmology, then to serious scientific speculation, and finally to the sophisticated theories we have today. It is like watching humanity grow up, one layer at a time. The ancient Greeks had their underworld, of course. But that was different. It was a realm of the dead, a spiritual place. What's really interesting is when these spiritual concepts started mixing with early attempts at scientific thinking. People began wondering, if there's a realm down there, what would it actually look like? How would it work? By the time we get to the 17th and 18th centuries, some of the brightest minds in Europe were taking hollow earth theories seriously. And I mean seriously. We are talking about actual mathematicians and astronomers doing real calculations about how this might work. Take Edmund Halley, yes, the same guy the famous comet is named after. In 1692, he proposed something that sounds almost like science fiction today. He suggested that the Earth was hollow, containing not one but multiple concentric spheres, each potentially capable of supporting life. Picture this. Imagine nesting dolls, but instead of wooden figures, each layer is an entire world with its own magnetic field, its own atmosphere, maybe even its own sun. Halley wasn't just daydreaming either. He was trying to explain something that genuinely puzzled scientists of his time: why compass needles sometimes pointed in slightly different directions. He thought maybe there were multiple magnetic fields from these nested worlds interfering with each other. It is actually quite elegant when you think about it, even if it turned out to be completely wrong. But here's what I find remarkable. Halley was observing real phenomena and trying to create a scientific explanation. He just didn't have the tools yet to understand what was really going on down there. His nested spheres were wrong, but his instinct that something complex and dynamic was happening in Earth's interior? That was absolutely right. Then came Leonhard Euler in the 18th century. Now, Euler was one of those mathematical geniuses who comes along maybe once in a century. He'd already revolutionized mathematics and physics. And when he turned his attention to the possibility of a hollow Earth, he didn't just speculate, he calculated. Euler proposed that the Earth was hollow with an opening at each pole. And here's the really wild part. He suggested there was a sun at the center, about 600 miles in diameter, providing light and warmth to civilizations living on the inner surface. Can you imagine? An entire world lit by its own internal sun, with people walking around on the inside of the globe, their feet pointing toward the center where this mini-sun blazed away. What's striking is that Euler wasn't some fringe theorist. He was working with the best scientific knowledge of his time. The mathematics of gravity were still being worked out. The idea of immense pressures and temperatures deep inside the Earth hadn't been established yet. From his perspective, a hollow Earth with an internal sun was actually a reasonable hypothesis. These weren't just idle fantasies, you understand. These theories were attempts to explain real mysteries. Why did the Earth have a magnetic field? Where did volcanoes get their fire? Why did compass needles behave strangely near the poles? The hollow Earth theory offered answers to all of these questions. And here's something that gives me chills when I think about it. In a way, these early theorists were more right than they knew. Not about the hollow part, obviously, but about the incredible activity happening deep inside our planet. They sensed that the Earth's interior was dynamic, energetic, alive in some sense. They just didn't have the tools yet to understand how. The real turning point came with seismology, the study of earthquakes. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, scientists had figured out something revolutionary. You could use earthquake waves to see inside the Earth. It is actually quite beautiful when you think about it. Every earthquake sends waves through the entire planet, and by carefully measuring how those waves travel, bend, and bounce, you can map the interior structure. It was like finally getting X-ray vision for the planet. And what they discovered was far more amazing than any hollow Earth theory. Instead of empty spaces with nested spheres, they found a dynamic, layered system of incredible complexity. The mantle, that vast region between the crust we live on and the iron core, at the center, turned out to be a world of slowly churning rock, heated to temperatures that would melt steel, under pressures that would crush anything from the surface. But here's the thing that really gets me. The hollow earth theorists were wrong about the structure, but they were absolutely right about the dynamism. The Earth's interior is incredibly active. It is just that instead of hollow spaces with civilizations, we have something arguably more remarkable: vast convection currents of molten rock that have been churning away for billions of years. These convection currents, it turns out, are what drive continental drift. The continents we live on are literally floating on this sea of slowly moving rock. The Americas are drifting away from Europe and Africa at about the same rate your fingernails grow. It is happening so slowly we cannot feel it, but over geological time, it reshapes the entire planet. And those mantle plumes that create volcanic islands like Hawaii? They are like jets of superheated rock rising from deep in the mantle, punching through the crust to create new land. It is as if the Earth is constantly reinventing itself from the inside out. So, in a strange way, the evolution of our understanding follows this beautiful arc. We started with intuitions about hidden worlds beneath our feet. Those intuitions were absolutely correct. There are hidden worlds down there, just not the kind we imagined. Instead of hollow spaces with civilizations, we found a realm of flowing rock that shapes our entire planet. The really fascinating thing is that this scientific understanding doesn't diminish the sense of wonder, it amplifies it. When Edmund Halley imagined nested spheres, he was thinking on a human scale. But what we've actually discovered operates on scales that dwarf human imagination. We are talking about processes that have been going on for billions of years, currents of molten rock that could swallow entire continents. And we are still discovering new things about this hidden world all the time. Just recently, scientists have found evidence of vast reservoirs of water trapped in mantle minerals, more water than all the surface oceans combined. They've discovered that the mantle has its own weather patterns, with hot and cold regions that shift over millions of years. It is like each generation of scientists has been developing better and better photographs of something that was always there, always active, always shaping our world from below. The hollow earth theorists saw the shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. We are finally starting to turn around and see what's casting those shadows. You know what strikes me most about this whole evolution of understanding? It shows how the human imagination and scientific discovery work together. Those early theorists weren't obstacles to scientific progress. They were necessary steps. Their bold speculations created the intellectual framework that later scientists could test, refine, and eventually revolutionize. In a way, Euler's internal sun wasn't so different from our understanding of the Earth's core. Both are sources of incredible energy at the planet's heart. Halley's nested spheres weren't so different from our layered understanding of crust, mantle, and core. The scale was wrong, the mechanism was wrong, but the basic intuition that Earth's interior is complex, structured, and dynamic, that was absolutely right. And that gives me hope about our current understanding. We've come so far from hollow Earth theories, but I suspect we are still just beginning to grasp the full reality of what lies beneath our feet. There are probably discoveries waiting down there that will seem as revolutionary to future generations as seismology seemed to the believers in Euler's internal sun. The long evolution of hidden worlds isn't over, you see. It is still continuing, one discovery at a time, as we slowly develop better ways to peer into the deepest mysteries of our own planet. And as we peel back these layers of scientific understanding, something remarkable emerges. Because if such a civilization did exist down there in the molten depths, they wouldn't just be surviving, they'd be engineering. They'd be creating. They'd be building wonders that we can barely imagine. Think about it for a moment. We live up here on the surface, and we've learned to harness wind and water, to work with wood and metal. But what if you lived in a world where the very ground beneath you flowed like honey? Where the pressure could crush diamonds, and the heat could melt any material we know? You wouldn't fight these forces, you'd learn to dance with them. Picture this, a civilization that's figured out how to surf the convection currents of molten rock. These aren't gentle streams we are talking about. These are massive flows of material, moving through the mantle like underwater rivers, carrying heat from the core toward the surface. They move slowly by our standards, maybe a few centimeters per year, but they carry incredible energy. Imagine if you could tap into that. You'd never worry about fuel or power again. It is like having access to the planet's own bloodstream, carrying energy directly from Earth's beating heart. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. We struggle up here on the surface to create certain materials. We need massive factories, extreme temperatures, incredible pressure. But down mantle, those conditions already exist naturally. It is a forge that's been running for billions of years, creating pressures that would make our most advanced laboratories look like toy workshops. Think about diamonds. We find them sometimes, carried up by volcanic eruptions, and we marvel at their clarity and strength. But those diamonds? They were just casually formed in the mantle, the way we might form ice cubes in our freezer. What if a mantle civilization could work with materials that can only exist under those extreme conditions? Materials so strong, so unique, that we do not even have names for them yet. They might build with substances that make diamond look soft, that make our strongest metal seem fragile as paper. But here's what really captures my imagination: the idea that they might not build the way we do at all. We construct things. We take materials and force them into shapes, bolt them together, weld them. But in a world of flowing rock and immense pressure, maybe you do not construct. Maybe you grow. Crystals already do this, do not they? They start small and gradually add layer upon layer, following natural patterns, creating structures of incredible precision and beauty. What if a mantle civilization had learned to guide this process? To whisper to the crystals, encouraging them to grow into exactly the shapes needed. Imagine cities that grow rather than being built, structures that repair themselves when damaged, architecture that's alive in its own mineral way. It is like gardening, but instead of tending flowers, you are cultivating buildings. And the biotechnology? Oh, the biotechnology would be unlike anything we could imagine. We work with water-based life, carbon chemistry, the familiar building blocks of biology as we know it. But down there, they might have learned to work with molten rock itself. Silicon-based chemistry operating at temperatures that would instantly vaporize any life form from our world. Picture organisms that do not just survive in molten rock, they thrive in it. Creatures that feed on heat and pressure, that process minerals the way our bodies process food. Biotechnology that can shape flowing stone the way we might shape clay, living systems that exist in perfect harmony with the geological forces around them. They wouldn't fight the heat, they'd embrace it. They wouldn't fear the pressure, they'd use it as a tool. Now, you might wonder how they'd handle waste, how they'd manage resources in such a closed system. But here's the beautiful part. In the mantle, everything recycles naturally. The convection currents carry materials up and around and back down again in vast loops that take millions of years to complete. It is a recycling system so perfect, so complete, that nothing is ever truly lost. A mantle civilization would have had to learn this lesson from day one. Waste nothing, because everything comes back around eventually. They'd understand circular systems in ways we are just beginning to grasp. Every byproduct would become input for something else. Every exhale would become another's breath. It would be the ultimate sustainable civilization, not by choice, but by necessity. But communication. Now, there's a puzzle that would require real ingenuity. How do you talk to someone when sound travels differently through molten rock? How do you send messages across vast distances when everything around you is in constant, slow motion? They might have learned to use the planet itself as their communication network. Seismic waves, those vibrations that travel through rock, could carry information across thousands of kilometers. They might tap out messages on the bedrock, sending ripples through the Earth's interior that their neighbors could feel and interpret hundreds of miles away. Imagine conversations conducted through gentle earthquakes, love songs expressed as rhythmic tremors, urgent warnings transmitted as carefully modulated vibrations through stone. We already know that whales can communicate across entire ocean basins using low-frequency sounds. Maybe a mantle civilization communicates across entire continents using low-frequency seismic pulses that they've learned to create and interpret with incredible precision. The engineering challenges would forge minds that think in completely different ways than ours. We think in terms of fixed structures, stable foundations, permanent installations. But they'd think like water, always flowing, always adapting, always finding the path of least resistance while still accomplishing their goals. Their architecture would be fluid. Their technology would be flexible. Their entire approach to problem solving would be based on working with natural forces rather than against them. It is a bit like the difference between a rigid dam and a flexible reed. The dam fights the flood until it breaks. The reed bends with the current and survives the storm. And perhaps most remarkably, they'd have had to develop this technology without any of the stepping stones we used. No fire, because everything's already burning. No wheels, because there's no solid ground to roll on. No metallurgy as we know it, because they'd be working with materials that exist naturally at temperatures that would melt our finest alloys. They'd have had to invent completely different solutions to every basic problem of civilization. Transportation without vehicles. Construction without solid foundations. Manufacturing without factories as we understand them. Every solution would be elegant in its adaptation to impossible conditions. The more you think about it, the more remarkable their engineering would have to be. Not just clever, revolutionary. Not just advanced, completely reimagined from the ground up. They would have had to solve problems we've never even considered, using principles we are only just beginning to understand. And maybe, just maybe, some of their solutions might inspire us to think differently about our own engineering challenges here on the surface. Because sometimes, the most innovative ideas come from imagining how you'd solve familiar problems in completely unfamiliar worlds. Now, as we've imagined the incredible engineering feats that might be possible in the mantle, let's dive deeper into something even more fascinating: the minds of those who might live there. Because engineering is just the physical manifestation of intelligence, isn't it? The real wonder lies in how consciousness itself might adapt to such an alien world. Picture this: you wake up every morning to the same thing. Not darkness, that implies the absence of light. No, you wake up to a reality where light was never part of the equation to begin with. Your entire species evolved in permanent darkness, and your mind developed completely different ways of understanding the world around you. What would that do to consciousness itself? Think about how much of your daily experience revolves around light. The way sunshine affects your mood, how colors influence your emotions, the comfort you find in brightness, the unease that creeps in when things get too dark. Now imagine none of that exists in your mental vocabulary. You'd have to develop entirely different, emotional responses to your environment. Instead of waking up to sunlight streaming through a window, these deep dwellers might wake up to the gentle vibrations of convection currents shifting around them. Their equivalent of a beautiful sunrise might be the subtle change in magnetic field intensity that signals the beginning of a new geological cycle. Where we find peace in a quiet morning, they might find tranquility in the steady, rhythmic pulse of the Earth's inner dynamics. It is not just about vision, though. It's about how the absence of our most dominant sense would reshape everything else. Without light to distract them, their other senses would become incredibly refined. They might experience sound in ways we cannot even imagine, feeling the subtle harmonics of rock layers settling, hearing conversations in the language of seismic waves. And here's where it gets really interesting. Time. You and I live by the rhythm of days and nights. We have seasons that mark the passage of time, weather patterns that give variety to our existence. Our entire psychology is built around cycles, sleeping when it is dark, feeling energetic in spring, getting cozy in winter. We measure our lives in years, marked by familiar patterns. But what if none of that existed? What if every moment was essentially identical to the last, at least on the surface? These mantle dwellers would need to develop completely different psychological rhythms. Maybe they'd sync their mental cycles to the much slower pulse of geological processes. Instead of feeling restless after a few hours, they might think in terms of decades or centuries as natural units of time. Their patience would be legendary by our standards. What we'd consider waiting would be, to them, just the natural flow of existence. Can you imagine having that kind of mental calm? That deep, geological patience woven into your very psychology? Without the constant stimulation of changing weather, shifting daylight, and seasonal cycles, their minds might turn inward in ways ours rarely do. They'd probably be natural meditators, finding richness in subtle internal experiences that we'd completely overlook. Where we need external variety to keep us engaged, they'd have developed an incredible capacity for finding infinite depth in apparent simplicity. And then there's the social aspect. This is where their psychology might be most different from ours. On the surface, we can survive alone, at least for a while. We can wander off, find our own food, build our own shelter. Independence is possible, even celebrated. But in the mantle, cooperation wouldn't just be nice to have. It would be the difference between life and death for everyone. Think about how that would shape their entire approach to relationships. Where we sometimes struggle with selfishness, where we have to learn to cooperate and compromise, they'd be born into a world where individual survival is literally impossible. Their psychology would be fundamentally collaborative from the very beginning. They might not even have the same concept of self that we do. When your survival is so completely dependent on the group, when every action you take affects everyone around you, the boundaries between me and us might become beautifully blurred. They could develop what we might call collective consciousness, not in some mystical sense, but as a practical adaptation to their reality. Imagine making decisions not just based on what's good for you, but with an automatic, instinctive understanding of how it affects the entire community. Their empathy wouldn't be something they have to work at. It would be as natural as breathing. And speaking of breathing, let's think about space itself. You and I navigate a world with clear up and down. We have horizons. We see distant mountains. We understand space in terms of flat plains and vertical heights. Our brains are wired for this kind of three-dimensional thinking, but it is actually pretty limited three-dimensional thinking. But in the mantle, in a world where everything flows, where there's no real ground to stand on, where you are essentially swimming through an ocean of molten rock, their spatial intelligence would be extraordinary. They'd think in true 3 dimensions, maybe even 4 dimensions, if you include the flow of time through space. Where we get disoriented if we are turned upside down, they'd be equally comfortable moving in any direction. The concepts of up and down that are so fundamental to our thinking might be completely meaningless to them. They'd navigate by magnetic fields, by pressure gradients, by the subtle currents in their flowing world. Can you picture what that kind of spatial freedom would do to their creativity? Without being locked into thinking about things in terms of floors and ceilings, left and right, their architecture, their art, their entire aesthetic sense would be completely liberated from our linear constraints. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of their psychology would be their relationship with change itself. We surface dwellers often resist change. We like our routines, our familiar places, our predictable patterns. Change makes us nervous because we've evolved in a world where change can mean danger. But these deep dwellers would live in a world of constant, gentle flow. Change wouldn't be something that happens to them. It would be the very medium they live in. They'd have a psychological flexibility that we can barely comprehend. Where we sometimes get stuck in rigid thinking patterns, they'd be naturally adaptable, flowing with circumstances the way water flows around obstacles. Their mental health might be remarkably stable because they'd never expect things to stay the same. And here's something really profound. They might have discovered a form of meditation that we are only just beginning to understand. Living in harmony with geological rhythms would mean sensing their consciousness with time frames that dwarf human experience. They'd have access to a kind of peace that comes from feeling connected to processes much larger than themselves. While we sometimes feel anxious because we are thinking too much about tomorrow or next week, they might naturally think in terms of centuries and millennia. Their perspective on problems would be incredibly wise because they'd see everything in the context of deep time. Imagine having that kind of mental stability, that unshakable sense that whatever you are going through, it is just a tiny moment in a much larger, more beautiful pattern. Of course, we are speculating here, painting pictures of minds we can only imagine. But that's part of what makes this thought experiment so valuable. By imagining how consciousness might adapt to completely different conditions, we get insights into our own psychology. We start to see which parts of our mental experience are truly universal, and which parts are just accidents of living on Earth's surface. Maybe these deep dwellers would look at our surface psychology with the same fascination we feel thinking about theirs. They might wonder how we manage to function with minds that are constantly distracted by changing light, seasonal shifts, and weather patterns. They might find our need for individual space puzzling, or be amazed by our ability to make quick decisions without consulting the entire community. In the end, consciousness is probably far more flexible and adaptable than we usually imagine. Whether in the crushing darkness of the mantle or the bright complexity of the surface world, intelligence finds a way not just to survive, but to create meaning, beauty, and connection. And maybe that's the most hopeful thing about imagining these deep dwellers. No matter how alien their world might seem, at their core, they'd probably be asking the same fundamental questions we ask. How do we live well? How do we take care of each other? How do we find meaning in our existence? The answers might be different, but the questions, those beautiful, universal questions, would probably be exactly the same. So we've explored how these deep dwellers might think differently, how their minds might work in ways that seem almost alien to us. But there's something even more profound to consider. What if living in the Earth's mantle doesn't just change how you think? What if it changes your entire understanding of what it means to exist? Think about it for a moment. We surface dwellers, we are obsessed with permanence. We build monuments to last forever. We write our names in stone. We create institutions and governments and try to make them eternal. But what if you lived in a world where everything is constantly flowing, constantly changing, where the very ground beneath you moves like slow-motion rivers of rock? In the mantle, nothing stays still. The rock flows in currents that take millions of years to complete their cycles. Imagine growing up in that environment. Your entire reality would be built on the understanding that everything, absolutely everything, is in motion. The walls of your world, if you could call them walls, would be flowing past you so slowly that only over thousands of lifetimes would you notice the change. This would create a completely different philosophy of existence, where we see permanence as the ideal and change as something to overcome. They might see flow as the natural state of being. Change wouldn't be something that happens to you. It would be what you are. It is like the difference between thinking you are a photograph versus knowing you are a movie. We often think of ourselves as fixed entities. I am this type of person. I have this personality. I believe these things. But what if you understood from birth that you are not a thing at all, but a process? What if your entire concept of self was built around the idea of becoming rather than being? This isn't just philosophical speculation. There's something beautifully practical about it. In our world, we struggle with change. We resist it. We mourn what we've lost. We fear what we might become. But in the mantle, resistance would be not just futile but completely foreign as a concept. You wouldn't resist the flow. You'd be the flow. And here's where it gets really interesting. In our surface world, consciousness feels very individual. I am me, you are you. We are separate beings with separate thought. But what if consciousness in the mantle worked differently? What if, in a world where everything flows together, awareness itself flowed together? Picture this. Instead of billions of separate minds, what if there was something more like a collective awareness? Not a hive mind where individuality is lost, but something more fluid. Your thoughts might flow into the larger current of consciousness, contributing to it, being shaped by it, but never really separate from it. It would be like the difference between raindrops and a river. Each drop is distinct for a moment, but it is also part of the larger flow. Your individual perspective would matter, would contribute to the whole, but you'd never experience that terrible isolation that sometimes haunts us surface dwellers. You'd never have to wonder if you are truly alone in the universe, because you'd always be connected to the larger stream of awareness. This connects to something profound about how they might understand wisdom. In our world, we think of wisdom as something individuals accumulate over a lifetime. You learn, you experience, you grow wiser. But what if wisdom in the mantle accumulated across the entire civilization, across deep time itself? Imagine if every insight, every discovery, every moment of understanding flowed into the collective memory of the species. Not just recorded like our books or internet, but actually experienced by future generations. The wisdom of living through millions of years of planetary change, of understanding patterns that play out over geological timescales. That kind of deep knowing would be impossible for any individual to achieve, but possible for a flowing collective consciousness. They might understand things about the nature of existence that we cannot even begin to grasp, because their perspective would span the kind of time frames where the really big patterns become visible. They'd see how consciousness itself evolves, how intelligence adapts, how life finds ways to flourish in any conditions given enough time. And here's something that might blow your mind. What if they see our surface world completely differently than we do? We think of the solid ground, our cities, our mountains. We think of these as the real, substantial things. But from a mantle perspective, all of this might seem like the thinnest possible illusion. Think about it from their point of view. They live in the vast interior of the planet, in the deep heart of the world where the real energy flows, where the forces that actually shape the planet do their work. To them, we might seem like we are living in a soap bubble floating on the surface of the ocean, thinking our bubble is the whole universe. Our solid world might look to them like foam on top of the waves, pretty, temporary, but not really substantial. They might view our entire civilization, all of human history, as something that happens in the blink of an eye on the thin skin of their world. Not unimportant, but ephemeral. It is humbling to think about, isn't it? We spend so much time and energy on things that feel monumentally important to us. Our careers, our achievements, our conflicts, our dramas. But, from the perspective of deep time, from the viewpoint of beings who think in geological timescales, all of this might seem like the brief dance of mayflies. But here's the beautiful thing. That doesn't make it meaningless. It just puts it in perspective. Maybe there's wisdom in both viewpoints. Maybe we need our quick, bright intensity, our passionate engagement with the brief moment we have. And maybe they need their deep, slow wisdom, their understanding of the vast patterns. This raises a fascinating question about intelligence itself. We tend to think that intelligence developed like ours, quick, verbal, focused on solving immediate problems, is the only real kind of intelligence. But what if intelligence that developed under completely different conditions would be so different that we might not even recognize it as intelligence at all? Imagine trying to have a conversation with a consciousness that thinks in thousand-year thoughts, where a single idea might take centuries to fully form, where what we consider a complete thought might be just the first syllable of something much larger. Would we even recognize that as communication? Or imagine intelligence that works collectively, where individual insights only make sense as part of a vast, interconnected web of understanding. It might be like trying to understand a symphony by listening to just one note at a time. Their wisdom might be completely alien to us, but it might also be exactly what we need. In our age of rapid change and instant everything, maybe there's something we could learn from consciousness that operates on geological timescales. Maybe there's a kind of peace that comes from understanding your place in patterns so vast that your individual existence is both infinitely precious and beautifully small at the same time. The ancient Greeks had this concept called gnosis, a kind of knowledge that comes not from learning facts, but from direct experience of deeper truths. Maybe mantle consciousness would be like living in a state of constant gnosis, where existence itself teaches you about the nature of reality, simply by being part of the flow. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about this thought experiment. It's not really about whether there's an actual civilization in the mantle. It is about expanding our own understanding of what consciousness might be, what intelligence might become, what wisdom might look like when it has the time and space to develop in ways we've never imagined. Their philosophy of existence might be as foreign to us as the concept of flowing through molten rock. But in imagining it, we open up possibilities for our own thinking. We start to question our assumptions about what it means to be, what it means to know, what it means to exist in relationship with something larger than ourselves. But in imagining it, we open up possibilities for our own thinking. We start to question our assumptions about what it means to be, what it means to know, what it means to exist in relationship with something larger than ourselves. And that brings us to perhaps the most profound aspect of a mantle civilization, their relationship with time itself. You see, if beings lived in the Earth's mantle, they'd experience something we can barely comprehend, geological time. Every action they took, every decision they made, wouldn't show its consequences for millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of years. Think about that for a moment. Imagine if every choice you made today wouldn't reveal its outcome until your descendants thousands of generations in the future experience the results. That's the reality a mantle civilization would face every single day. Down in those flowing depths, where rock moves like honey and pressure shapes everything over eons, cause and effect would work on a scale that dwarfs human comprehension. When we make a mistake, we usually see the consequences pretty quickly, maybe in minutes, hours, or at most a few years. But in the mantle? The things you do today might not manifest as observable changes for longer than complex life has existed on Earth's surface. This isn't just a fascinating thought experiment. It is actually how our planet works right now. The volcanic eruptions we witness today, the ones that sometimes shut down air traffic or create new islands, they are the result of processes that began deep in the mantle millions of years ago. That molten rock, pushing up through Hawaii or Iceland. It started its journey before our human ancestors even existed. So when we imagine a civilization living down there, we are really imagining beings who understand something we struggle with: true, long-term thinking. They'd have to develop a completely different relationship with responsibility. Every decision wouldn't just affect them or their immediate community. It would ripple through geological time, eventually reaching the surface world in ways they might never directly witness. Picture this. A mantle dweller makes a choice about how to direct a convection current. Maybe they are trying to solve an immediate problem, something affecting their community and their deep, flowing world. But that decision sets in motion changes that will eventually shift tectonic plates, influence mountain formation, maybe even alter the pattern of earthquakes on the surface. The consequences of their action might not be felt by surface dwellers for 10 million years. It is like planting a tree, except the tree will not even begin to sprout until long after not just you, but your entire species might have evolved into something else entirely. This kind of thinking would fundamentally change how a civilization approaches morality and ethics. We surface dwellers often struggle to think beyond our own lifetimes. We have trouble making sacrifices today for benefits that might come decades in the future. But a mantle civilization would have to think in terms of consequences that span geological epochs. They develop what we might call deep time wisdom, an understanding that every action is essentially a vote for the kind of planet you want to exist millions of years from now. It is a form of responsibility that's almost impossible for us to truly grasp. And here's where it gets really interesting. If such beings existed, they might view every volcanic eruption, every earthquake, every shift in the Earth's magnetic field as a message from the past. Those dramatic surface events we experience, they'd be like letters written by their ancestors, finally arriving after an impossibly long postal delay. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii, or when Krakatoa exploded with such force that it was heard around the world, a mantle civilization might have seen these not as random natural disasters, but the completion of intentions set in motion by their predecessors eons earlier. Every volcanic island, every hot spring, every geothermal vent would carry the signature of ancient decisions made in the deep. This perspective would create a form of communication across time that we can barely imagine. Current mantle dwellers would be constantly receiving messages from the past while simultaneously composing messages for the future. They'd live in a world where the present moment is just a brief intersection between ancient causes and unimaginably distant effects. The wisdom that would emerge from such an existence would be unlike anything in our surface world. They'd understand patience not as a virtue to be developed, but as a fundamental fact of existence. They'd know that rushing leads nowhere, because nothing in their world can be rushed. The rock flows at its own pace, pressure builds according to its own timeline, and change happens when it happens, not a moment sooner. This might sound limiting to us surface dwellers, always in a hurry, always wanting immediate results. But consider the peace that might come from truly accepting the rhythm of geological time. No anxiety about quick fixes or instant gratification. No frustration when things do not happen immediately. Just a deep, abiding understanding that everything unfolds exactly as it should, when it should. Their concept of karma, if we can call it that, would be simultaneously more complex and more simple than ours. More complex because the web of cause and effect would span timescales we cannot comprehend, with actions having consequences across multiple geological eras. But more simple because there'd be no rushing the process, no way to avoid accountability, no shortcuts to consequences. In our surface world, we sometimes think we can escape the results of our actions through distance or time. We can move away, change our identities, hope people forget. But in a mantle civilization, every action would be permanently woven into the geological record. The rock itself would remember. The flow patterns would carry the memory forward. There'd be no hiding from consequences. They just take millions of years to fully manifest. This creates a profound form of cosmic justice. Not the kind imposed by external authority, but the kind that emerges naturally from the structure of reality itself. Every gesture of generosity, every act of wisdom, every decision made for the good of the whole would eventually contribute to the stability and flourishing of the entire planetary system. And every selfish choice, every act of destruction, every decision that prioritized immediate gain over long-term sustainability would eventually contribute to instability and suffering. But here's what's truly beautiful about this geological karma. It would teach that all beings, all civilizations, all worlds are ultimately interconnected. The choices made in the deepest parts of the earth eventually affect everything that lives on the surface. The stability of our continents, the fertility of our soils, the very air we breathe, it all depends on processes happening thousands of kilometers beneath our feet. A mantle civilization would understand viscerally what we are only beginning to learn, that we are all part of one planetary system, and the health of any part affects the health of the whole. So as we think about these deep dwellers and their relationship with geological time, we might ask ourselves, what if we tried to think like them, even just a little bit? What if we considered the consequences of our actions not just for our lifetimes, but for the lifetimes of beings who might exist long after we are gone? What if we developed just a tiny fraction of their patience, their long-term thinking, their understanding that we are all part of something much larger and more enduring than our individual lives? In imagining how a mantle civilization might relate to time and consequence, we are really exploring what it might mean to live with true wisdom, the kind that emerges when you understand your place in the vast, slow, beautiful unfolding of existence itself. Now, if we are really going to imagine an advanced civilization thriving in Earth's mantle, we need to talk about what might be the most fascinating aspect of all, how life could possibly adapt to survive in conditions that would instantly destroy anything we know. Think about it for a moment. We are talking about an environment where the pressure is so intense that it is like having 24 elephants standing on every square centimeter of your body. Where temperatures reach over 4,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt copper. Where there's no solid ground, no air to breathe, no light to see by. It is the kind of place that makes the deepest ocean trenches look like a pleasant afternoon stroll. And yet, here's what's absolutely incredible about life. It finds a way. We've discovered bacteria living in the walls of nuclear reactors, thriving in acid that would dissolve metal, surviving in the vacuum of space. Life doesn't just adapt to extreme conditions. It seems to seek them out, to push the boundaries of what we thought was possible. So let's imagine what kinds of adaptations would be necessary for intelligent life to not just survive, but flourish in the Earth's mantle. And I think you'll find that the solutions evolution might come up with are more beautiful and ingenious than anything we could dream up in science fiction. First, let's talk about the most basic challenge, the crushing pressure. At mantle depths, the pressure is so immense that it changes the very structure of matter. Water behaves differently, minerals take on forms that cannot exist on the surface, and any air pockets would be compressed into nothingness. A mantle civilization would need bodies that work with this pressure rather than against it. Imagine beings whose bones aren't made of calcium carbonate like ours, but of silicon-based minerals, essentially living crystal structures that actually get stronger under pressure. Their bodies might be more like flexible gemstones than soft tissue as we know it. And here's a beautiful thought. What if they didn't see this crushing pressure as a limitation, but as a tool? They might have evolved to use pressure differentials the way we use muscle contractions. Tiny pressure changes in their crystalline bodies could allow for incredibly precise movements, almost like living hydraulic systems. But pressure is just the beginning. How do you navigate in a world of complete darkness, where normal senses would be useless? Well, the mantle is far from sensory dead. It is alive with magnetic fields, electrical currents, and vibrations that travel through rock. A mantle civilization might have evolved senses we can barely imagine. The ability to feel magnetic field variations with the precision we use to see colors. They might navigate by sensing the Earth's magnetic field lines the way we follow roads. Think about how bats use echolocation, or how sharks can sense electrical fields. Now imagine that taken to an incredible extreme. These beings might communicate and navigate using seismic waves, sending vibrations through solid rock that could carry complex information across hundreds of kilometers. Their equivalent of a whispered conversation might be felt by seismologists on the surface as a minor earthquake. And what about their senses of touch and texture? Without light, the feel of different minerals, the flow patterns of molten rock, the subtle vibrations of convection currents might create a sensory landscape as rich and detailed as our visual world. They might experience beauty in the crystalline structure of forming minerals, the way we see beauty in a sunset. Now, here's where it gets really interesting: reproduction and child-rearing in a world without solid ground. How would that even work? In the mantle's flowing environment, traditional concepts of nests, homes, or protected spaces do not apply. But life is creative. Perhaps young would develop inside protective crystalline shells that could withstand the extreme conditions, floating through the convection currents like seeds on the wind. Or maybe reproduction would be more like coral spawning, with genetic material released into the flowing rock to combine and develop in the currents themselves. Child-rearing might be a community effort on a scale we can hardly imagine. Young beings might be raised by the entire flow system, passed from current to current, educated by the collective wisdom of the deep. In a world where individual survival depends entirely on understanding the group dynamics, children might learn by literally flowing with their community. And speaking of communication, imagine trying to develop language in a world where sound travels through solid rock, where chemical signals drift through molten minerals, and where the slightest movement can be felt across vast distances. Their language might be incredibly sophisticated, using combinations of vibration, chemical releases, and magnetic field variations. A single word might involve creating a specific pattern of rock vibration while simultaneously releasing a particular mineral signature. It would be like speaking in music, chemistry, and physics all at once. But here's what really captures my imagination. They might have developed forms of communication that work across geological time. Messages embedded in crystal formations that could be read thousands of years later. Information encoded in the very flow patterns of the mantle itself. They might think of communication not as brief exchanges, but as contributions to an eternal conversation that spans millennia. Now, you might be wondering, what would they eat? How would a food chain work in an environment without photosynthesis, without plants, or traditional organic matter? This is where it gets truly alien and truly beautiful. Their entire ecosystem might be based on chemical energy rather than solar energy. Think about the chemosynthetic bacteria we found around deep ocean vents, life forms that literally eat chemicals and excrete energy. A mantle ecosystem might run on the Earth's own energy systems. They might feed directly on the chemical reactions happening in the rock around them, processing iron and sulfur compounds the way we process sugars and proteins. Different species might specialize in different chemical processes, some feeding on the energy released when one mineral transforms into another under pressure, others thriving on the electrical currents generated by the Earth's rotation. And the beauty of this system is that it would be perfectly sustainable. While we surface dwellers are always consuming and depleting resources, a mantle civilization would be living off the fundamental energy of the planet itself. They'd be like living solar panels, but instead of converting sunlight, they'd be converting the basic chemical and physical processes that keep the Earth alive. What strikes me most about imagining these adaptations is how it challenges our assumptions about what life needs to be. We think of intelligence as requiring brains like ours, housed in bodies like ours, communicating in ways we can understand. But that's just because it is the only kind of intelligence we know. Evolution working the mantle might create forms of consciousness that are distributed rather than centralized, intelligence that emerges from the collective behavior of thousands of individuals flowing together. Their thoughts might literally move through the rock itself, processed not by individual brains, but by the living mineral networks they've created. They might experience consciousness the way a forest experiences seasons, as a slow collective interconnected awareness that spans vast areas and long periods of time. Each individual might be like a neuron in a planet-sized brain, contributing to thoughts and decisions that emerge from the whole system working together. And here's the most beautiful part. These aren't just idle fantasies. Every adaptation I have described has precedence in life forms we've actually discovered on Earth. Silicon-based structures in diatoms, magnetic navigation in bacteria, chemical communication in plants, collective intelligence in social insects. The mantle civilization we are imagining would simply be taking these proven strategies to their logical extreme, shaped by conditions that exist right beneath our feet. In a way, we are not imagining alien life at all. We are imagining Earth life taken to its most extraordinary expression. What if evolution, given 4 billion years and the most extreme conditions on the planet, could create forms of intelligence and adaptation that would make our surface-bound existence look like a simple first draft? What if the most advanced life on Earth isn't reaching for the stars, but living in the deep, patient, flowing heart of the planet itself? That's the real beauty of thinking about adaptation in impossible places. It reminds us that life is far more creative, far more resilient, and far more ingenious than we give it credit for. And maybe, just maybe, it is already proven that by creating forms of intelligence we haven't even learned to recognize yet. And if we are being honest, that ability to adapt and evolve in impossible conditions might give us a completely different perspective on how we are living our own lives up here, on the surface. Because imagine for a moment how mantle dwellers might actually view us, these strange creatures who've chosen to live on the thin, fragile shell of their world. Picture them looking up at us through thousands of kilometers of rock, trying to understand our peculiar surface dweller ways. They'd probably find our obsession with accumulating material possessions absolutely baffling. Here we are, frantically collecting things, bigger houses, newer cars, more clothes, more gadgets, while they exist in a world where everything is constantly flowing and changing. To them, trying to hold on to physical objects would be like trying to grab handfuls of water. They'd understand that nothing stays the same, that everything is always in motion, always transforming. Think about it. In their world, the very ground beneath them moves like thick honey. The idea of owning a piece of land would be absurd when that land is literally flowing somewhere else at geological speeds. They might look at our real estate markets and storage units and wonder why we are so determined to anchor ourselves to things that, in the grand scheme of geological time, are just temporary arrangements of atoms. And then there's our pace of life. We rush around, checking our phones every few minutes, stressed about deadlines that are weeks or months away. Meanwhile, they exist on geological time, where meaningful change happens over millions of years. They'd probably watch our frantic daily routines with the same patient amusement that we might watch ants rushing around an anthill. To mantle dwellers, our anxiety about being 5 minutes late to a meeting would seem like worrying about the position of individual grains of sand on a beach. They'd understand time as something vast and patient, where wisdom comes from watching patterns unfold over eons. Our entire recorded human history would be like a brief flicker to them. Interesting, but just a momentary event in the larger flow of planetary time. Here's what might really puzzle them though: our fear of the dark and enclosed spaces. We've got people paying extra for hotel rooms with big windows, designing houses with open floor plans, and getting anxious in windowless rooms. But to mantle dwellers, enclosed spaces would be safety, comfort, home. The idea of living exposed under an open sky might seem terrifying to them. All that empty space above, no protective layers of rock, vulnerable to cosmic radiation and temperature extremes. They might think we are incredibly brave for choosing to live on the surface, or incredibly foolish, like choosing to sleep on a tightrope instead of in a bed. They'd probably wonder how we get any rest at all, knowing we are just sitting on this thin crust with nothing but empty space, stretching infinitely above us. And speaking of energy, there's a beautiful irony they'd probably appreciate. Here they are, living directly in the source of Earth's internal heat, surrounded by the very forces that drive our planet's magnetic field and geological activity. Meanwhile, we are up here chasing sunlight, that distant star energy, building solar panels, and arguing about renewable resources. To them, we might seem like people who live next to a flowing river but insist on collecting rainwater from puddles instead. They'd have direct access to the vast thermal energy of the mantle, while we are figuring out how to capture and store the indirect energy that makes its way to us from 93 million miles away. They might find our entire concept of up and down rather amusing too. We use up to mean success, progress, good things, moving up in the world, climbing the corporate ladder, high society. But from their perspective, going up means moving toward the cold, thin, fragile surface where life is precarious and resources are scattered. Going down in their world might mean moving toward greater stability, more intense energy, deeper wisdom. They'd live in a reality where the deeper you go, the more connected you become to the fundamental forces that actually run the planet. Our surface-dwelling metaphors would seem backward to them, like calling the foundation of a building low and the roof high, when the foundation is actually what supports everything else. But here's what might really fascinate them about us surface dwellers: our tendency to live on the surface of problems rather than going deep. We are constantly looking for quick fixes, immediate solutions, surface-level answers. Someone's feeling anxious? Take a pill. Relationship problems? Try a different dating app. Environmental crisis? Recycle more plastic bottles. Mantle dwellers, existing in that realm of slow, deep, fundamental processes, might understand that real solutions come from going to the core of things. They'd know that surface symptoms are usually just expressions of deeper patterns, and that lasting change happens slowly, from the inside out. They might watch our news cycles and social media trends, these rapid-fire surface phenomena, and recognize them as the equivalent of small waves on the ocean's surface, while the deep currents that actually matter flow silently below. In their world, you cannot just slap a band-aid on a problem. When convection currents shift in the mantle, it affects everything: the movement of continents, the behavior of magnetic fields, the patterns of volcanic activity. They'd understand that everything is connected in slow, deep, inevitable ways. So they might look at our approach to personal growth, politics, relationships, environmental issues, all these areas where we want immediate results, and think we are missing the point entirely. Real change, lasting change, happens at depth. It takes time. It requires patience and understanding of underlying forces. We might seem to them like people trying to change the weather by painting clouds different colors, when what really drives weather patterns are those massive invisible air currents and pressure systems that move slowly across continents. And yet, and this is important, I do not think they judge us harshly for being surface dwellers. If anything, they might have a kind of gentle admiration for us. Because living on the surface requires a different kind of courage, a different kind of adaptation. We've learned to be quick and flexible, to respond rapidly to changing conditions, to build and create and explore in ways that their slow, steady world might not allow. We are like butterflies in their eyes, beautiful, delicate, brief, but also capable of incredible journeys and transformations that happen on timescales they can barely perceive. While they are the masters of deep time and fundamental forces, we are the masters of quick adaptation and surface innovation. They might even envy some aspects of our surface life. The way we can see stars, experience weather, feel wind, watch things grow from seeds to full size in just months rather than millions of years. The way we can travel quickly across vast distances, meet thousands of different people, experience constant variety and change, But I think what they'd appreciate most about us is our curiosity. The fact that we are not content to just live on the surface. We dig, we explore, we ask questions about what lies beneath. We've spent centuries trying to understand the very realm where they exist, developing theories and technologies to peer into the depths that are their everyday reality. They might see our scientific exploration of the mantle, our seismic studies and geological surveys, as a kind of reaching out, surface dwellers trying to understand deep dwellers, thin crust inhabitants attempting to comprehend the vast flowing world below. And in that reaching, in that curiosity about what lies beneath the surface of things, maybe we are not so different after all. Whether you exist in the fast, bright, changeable surface world, or the slow, dark, flowing depths, the desire to understand, to connect, to know what lies beyond your everyday experience, that might be universal. Maybe that's what intelligence really is, regardless of where it evolves or how it adapts. The urge to look beyond, to wonder what else is possible, to imagine other ways of being. And maybe that's exactly what we'll need as we stand on the edge of our own deep frontier. Because here's the thing, we are not just imagining mantle civilizations anymore. We are starting to build the tools that might actually let us explore those depths ourselves. And honestly, the technology that's emerging is almost as mind-bending as the civilizations we've been dreaming about. Right now, as we speak, engineers are working on drilling systems that could eventually punch through the crust deeper than we've ever gone before. The current record, that 12-kilometer Russian borehole we mentioned at the start of our journey, that's just the beginning. New drilling techniques using plasma torches and diamond-tipped bits could potentially take us 10 times deeper. We are talking about actually reaching the upper mantle within our lifetimes. Think about that for a moment. The same species that figured out how to fly is now figuring out how to swim through solid rock. It is like we are developing gills for an ocean we cannot even see yet. But here's where it gets really interesting. We do not have to wait for better drills to start exploring the mantle. We've got something even more powerful, artificial intelligence that can simulate entire worlds inside computers. Scientists are already using AI to model mantle convection, to predict how rock flows deep beneath our feet. But what if we took that further? What if we used AI to actually simulate what a mantle civilization might look like? You could create entire digital worlds with the right pressure, the right temperature, the right chemical conditions. Then you let artificial evolution run for millions of simulated years and see what emerges. It is like growing civilizations in a digital petri dish. And the results might teach us things about adaptation and intelligence that we never could have imagined on our own. There's something beautiful about that, isn't there? Using our intelligence to imagine other forms of intelligence. It is like consciousness examining itself through different mirrors. Of course, if we really wanted to explore the deep earth ourselves, not just with machines, but with human presence, we'd need to become something different than what we are now. We'd need to engineer ourselves for conditions no surface dweller was ever meant to survive. And that technology is coming too. Bioengineering is already letting us modify bacteria to survive in extreme conditions. What if we could do the same for humans? Enhanced pressure tolerance, modified metabolism, new sensory organs that could navigate in perpetual darkness. We could literally adapt ourselves to become deep earth explorers. It sounds like science fiction, but then again, so did traveling to the moon 50 years ago. Every impossible thing starts as an impossible idea until someone makes it possible. But you know what might push us toward these deep frontiers faster than pure curiosity? Necessity. Homo. Climate change is forcing us to think differently about where humans can live. As surface conditions become more extreme, underground habitats start looking more attractive. We've already seen how underground cities work. Places like Montreal's underground city house, hundreds of thousands of people. But what if we went deeper? What if we learn to live not just below the surface, but far below it? The mantle civilizations we've been imagining might end up being us, centuries from now. Surface dwellers who gradually moved deeper and deeper, adapting as we went, until we found our home in the flowing rock itself. There's a certain poetry to that idea. Humans beginning on the surface, reaching for the stars, only to discover that our true frontier was always beneath our feet. And here's something that might surprise you. We are already finding life in places we never expected to find it. Deep in the Earth's crust, miles below the surface, scientists have discovered microbes living in conditions that should be impossible. High pressure, high temperature, no sunlight, barely any nutrients. These tiny organisms are proof that life doesn't just survive in extreme conditions, it thrives there. Every time we drill deeper, we find them. Living in rock pores, feeding on minerals, existing in a completely alien world that shares the same planet as our sunlit forests and oceans. If life can exist there, in what we thought was barren rock, then maybe life in the mantle isn't such a crazy idea after all. These discoveries are changing how we think about life itself. We used to believe that life needed very specific conditions, just the right temperature, just the right chemistry, just the right amount of energy. But these deep earth microbes are showing us that life is far more creative and adaptable than we ever imagined. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If microscopic life can figure out how to exist in solid rock, what might billions of years of evolution produce in the flowing environment of the mantle? The tools we are developing for space exploration are helping us explore inner space too. The same technologies that let us survive in the vacuum of space, closed-loop life support systems, radiation shielding, pressure suits, these could be adapted for deep Earth exploration. We are learning that the principles of surviving in extreme environments are surprisingly similar, whether you are heading toward the stars or toward the Earth's core. In fact, some scientists think that learning to live deep underground might be essential practice for living on other planets. Mars habitats will probably be underground, protected from radiation and temperature extremes. The moon bases we are planning will be buried beneath lunar soil for protection. If we are going to become a spacefaring species, we need to become an underground-dwelling species first. So in a way, those imaginary mantle civilizations aren't just thought experiments about alien life. They are previews of what human civilization might become. We might be looking at our own future every time we dream about life in the deep Earth. In the deep Earth. The technology is advancing so fast, it is almost dizzying. Quantum sensors that can detect tiny changes in gravitational fields, giving us better maps of the mantle structure. Advanced materials that can survive pressures and temperatures we've never been able to withstand before. Robotic systems that can operate autonomously in environments where radio signals cannot reach. Each breakthrough brings us a little closer to actually reaching those depths we've only been able to imagine. And with each step forward, the line between science fiction and scientific possibility gets a little blurrier. But maybe that's always been the way discovery works. First, we imagine what might be possible. Then we develop the tools to make it real. The same curiosity that makes us wonder about mantle civilizations is the same curiosity that drives us to build the technology that might actually find them or become them. Think about it this way. Every major human achievement started as someone staring into the unknown and asking what if? What if we could fly? What if we could cure disease? What if we could split the atom? What if we could reach the moon? And now we are asking, what if we could live in the Earth's mantle? That question is no longer just a fantasy. It is becoming an engineering problem. And history shows us that once humans start treating impossible things as engineering problems, those impossible things have a funny way of becoming inevitable. The deep frontier isn't just waiting for us, it is calling to us. And for the first time in human history, we might actually be ready to answer that call. But what if they are already trying to reach us? What if, while we are dreaming of drilling deeper and building technology to explore the mantle, there's a civilization down there that's been sending us signals all along? You know, it is funny how we always imagine first contact happening from space, radio telescopes picking up alien messages from distant stars. But what if the most profound discovery in human history isn't waiting for us in the cosmos, but right beneath our feet? What if we've been standing on the answer to "Are we alone this entire time?" Think about it for a moment. Every day, seismic stations around the world record thousands of earthquakes, tremors, and vibrations moving through the earth. Most of these readings fit perfectly into our understanding of plate tectonics and geological processes. But not all of them. There are anomalies, strange patterns that make scientists scratch their heads and double-check their equipment. These unexplained signals from deep within the earth could be completely natural phenomena that we just do not understand yet. That's the most likely explanation, and it is what any good scientist would tell you. But here's where our imagination gets to play. What if some of these signals aren't random at all? What if, buried within the constant chatter of earthquakes and shifting rock, there are patterns that are too organized, too intentional to be mere geology? Picture this. You are living in the mantle, and you've developed a sophisticated civilization over millions of years. You understand that there are these strange, thin-skinned creatures living on the surface, beings that seem to live impossibly fast lives and make a lot of noise with their digging and drilling. How would you try to communicate with them? You cannot exactly send a postcard. Your world is one of flowing rock and immense pressure. Your communication would have to work within those constraints. Maybe you'd learn to modulate the natural seismic processes that you understand so well. Perhaps you'd find ways to create specific vibration patterns that carry messages through the rock. It would be like tapping out Morse code, but instead of using a telegraph key, you are orchestrating the movement of molten stone across hundreds of miles. The challenge of detecting such signals would be enormous. We are talking about trying to find meaningful patterns in an ocean of geological noise. It is like trying to pick out a whispered conversation in the middle of a rock concert. But that doesn't mean it is impossible, just incredibly difficult. Our seismic equipment has become incredibly sophisticated over the past few decades. We can detect vibrations so subtle that they'd be completely imperceptible to human senses. We can track waves as they bounce and bend through the Earth's layers, creating detailed maps of what lies beneath us. If there were artificial patterns hidden in all this data, we might actually have a chance of finding them. But here's where it gets really interesting. What if we've already found some of these patterns, but we've been interpreting them wrong? What if some of the geological phenomena we've been studying are actually technology from a mantle civilization? Think about volcanic eruptions for a moment. We understand them as natural pressure release systems, the Earth's way of letting off steam. But what if some eruptions aren't random geological events? What if they are controlled, deliberate actions by beings who understand the planet's pressure systems better than we could ever imagine? It is a wild thought, but consider this. A civilization that's evolved in the mantle would have an intimate understanding of how convection currents work, how pressure builds and releases, how different materials behave under extreme conditions. They might be able to trigger volcanic activity as easily as we turn on a faucet. To them, an eruption might be a form of communication, a way of sending specific chemical messages to the surface. We know that volcanic gases contain all sorts of information about what's happening deep in the earth. Scientists study these emissions to understand mantle chemistry and processes. But what if some of these chemical signatures aren't just random geological data? What if they are encoded messages? And then there's the question of how our activities might appear to them. We've been drilling into the earth for decades, extracting oil, gas, and minerals. We've been setting off underground nuclear tests, fracking operations that create artificial earthquakes, and deep mining projects that carve enormous caverns in the rock. From their perspective, this might look like a very primitive civilization that's just learning to interact with the planet's interior. Maybe our drilling attempts seem like tentative knocking on their door. Our mining operations might appear to them like children digging random holes in their backyard. If you were a mantle dweller watching these activities, you might start wondering, are these surface creatures trying to communicate? Are they just destructive? Or are they simply unaware that anyone lives down here? The more you think about it, the more you realize how much we do not know about the signals constantly flowing beneath our feet. Every earthquake tells a story, but we are still learning how to read that story. Every volcanic eruption carries information from the deep, but we are just beginning to understand what that information means. Scientists have discovered some truly puzzling seismic anomalies over the years. There are deep earthquake swarms that do not follow normal patterns. There are mysterious vibrations that seem to emanate from specific locations in the mantle. There are magnetic field variations that do not match what our models predict should be happening. Most of these anomalies have natural explanations, or at least explanations that assume everything happening in the Earth is purely geological. But that's an assumption, isn't it? We assume that intelligence only exists on the surface because that's the only place we've found it so far. The truth is, if there were a civilization in the mantle, detecting their presence would require us to completely rethink how we analyze seismic data. We'd need to look for patterns within patterns, for regularities that shouldn't exist if everything were purely random. We'd need to develop new ways of thinking about what constitutes a signal versus what constitutes noise. And that's assuming they want to communicate with us at all. Think about it from their perspective. We are incredibly short-lived by their standards, existing for just a brief moment in geological time. We are loud, we are destructive, and we are completely ignorant of the delicate balance that keeps the planet functioning. Would you want to make contact with a species like that? On the other hand, maybe they are curious about us in the same way we are curious about them. Maybe they wonder what it is like to live in such a thin, fragile environment where everything changes so quickly. Maybe they are fascinated by our ability to create technology and art and music in the brief span of a few decades. If they did want to establish communication, the biggest challenge would be the timescales involved. We think in terms of hours, days, years. They might think in terms of millennia. A simple hello from them might take 1,000 years to transmit, and by the time we figured out it was a message, entire human civilizations might have risen and fallen. But maybe that's not how it would work. Maybe an advanced mantle civilization would have figured out ways to speed up their communications, to work within our time frame rather than their own. Maybe they've been watching us long enough to understand our temporal limitations. The idea that we might be receiving signals right now, buried in data we haven't learned to interpret yet, is both thrilling and humbling. It means that the answer to one of humanity's biggest questions might not require building massive space telescopes or sending probes to distant planets. It might just require us to listen more carefully to the planet we are already standing on. Every seismic reading becomes a potential message. Every volcanic eruption becomes a possible attempt at contact. Every unexplained geological phenomenon becomes a mystery that might hold the key to discovering we are not alone. Of course, the rational part of our minds knows that the vast majority of these signals are exactly what they appear to be, natural geological processes playing out according to the laws of physics. But that tiny possibility, that chance that some of these patterns might be intentional, might be intelligent, might be attempts at communication across the impossible gulf between our world and theirs, that possibility changes everything. It means we are not just studying the Earth to understand how it works. We are potentially eavesdropping on conversations that have been happening right beneath our feet for millions of years. We are possibly standing at the threshold of the most significant discovery in human history, and we might not even know it yet. The deep is calling to us, just as we are calling to it. And in that calling, in that reaching across vast differences in environment and timescale and ways of being, there's something profoundly beautiful about the possibility. And maybe that's what this is all really about. Not whether there's actually an advanced civilization living in Earth's mantle, but what it means that we keep coming back to this idea. What it says about us that we are drawn to these stories of hidden worlds beneath our feet. Think about it. We've explored the highest mountains, mapped the ocean floors, sent probes to the edges of our solar system. But still, we find ourselves wondering about what's down there, in the deep. There's something about the idea of the underground that captures our imagination in a way that even outer space doesn't quite match. Maybe it is because, when we look up at the stars, we are looking at something impossibly far away. But when we think about the mantle, we are thinking about something that's right here, right now, just beneath us. It is intimate in a way. Every step you take, you are walking on the thin roof of a vast hidden world. And isn't there something comforting about that? The idea that intelligence might find a way to exist anywhere, under any conditions? When we imagine civilizations thriving in the crushing heat and pressure of the mantle, we are really celebrating the incredible adaptability of consciousness itself. It is like we are saying, if life can figure out how to exist in molten rock, then maybe there's hope for us too, whatever challenges we face. Maybe intelligence is more resilient, more creative, more determined than we give it credit for. You know, throughout this journey we've taken together, we've talked about the physics of the mantle, the mythology of underground worlds, the engineering challenges of living in such extreme conditions. But underneath all of that, there's been this deeper current running through every part of our story. It is the current of human loneliness. Our deep desire to not be alone in this universe. When ancient cultures told stories about the ant people who lived underground and helped humanity survive disasters, they weren't just making up fairy tales. They were expressing something fundamental about the human experience. This sense that somewhere, somehow, there might be others who understand what it is like to exist in a challenging world. And that feeling hasn't gone away. If anything, it has gotten stronger as we've learned more about how vast and seemingly empty space appears to be. The more we understand about the incredible coincidences that had to align for life to emerge on Earth's surface, the more precious and unlikely our existence seems. So we keep looking. Up at the stars, down into the depths, sideways into parallel dimensions in our science fiction. We keep asking, is anybody else out there? Does anybody else know what this is like? The mantle civilization idea is beautiful because it suggests that maybe they are not out there at all. Maybe they are right here, sharing our planet, just existing in a completely different way. Maybe we've never been alone. Maybe we just haven't figured out how to listen properly yet. And here's something wonderful about mysteries like this one. They do not actually need to be solved to serve their purpose. The question itself is valuable. The wondering is valuable. When you let your mind wander down into Earth's depths, when you try to imagine what it would be like to exist in flowing rock and crushing pressure, something happens. You start to appreciate just how remarkable your own existence is. How perfectly calibrated our thin slice of reality is for the kind of consciousness we experience. The air pressure that lets us breathe easily. The temperature range that keeps water liquid. The solid ground that gives us something to build on. The day and night cycles that regulate our biology. All of these things that we take for granted become miraculous when you contrast them with the extreme conditions just a few kilometers beneath your feet. In a way, imagining mantle dwellers makes us better surface dwellers. It helps us see our world with fresh eyes. But there's another layer to this, isn't there? When we think about civilizations that might exist in deep time, operating on geological scales, making decisions that will not show consequences for millions of years, it challenges us to think differently about our own choices. What if we started thinking like mantle dwellers? What if we made decisions based not on quarterly profits or election cycles, but on what would be best for Earth 1,000 years from now? 10,000 years from now? There's a kind of wisdom in imagining intelligence that operates on those timescales. A patience that we surface dwellers, with our brief lifespans and urgent needs, sometimes struggle to find. And maybe that's another reason we are drawn to these deep world stories. They offer us a different way of thinking about time and consequence and responsibility. They suggest that wisdom might come not from moving fast and breaking things, but from moving slowly and considering everything. Of course, we cannot know for certain whether the mantle is home to an advanced civilization. The physics seem to make it impossible. The temperatures that would melt any chemistry we understand. The pressures that would crush any structure we can imagine. The complete absence of the energy sources that power all the life we know about. But then again, 100 years ago, we would have said it was impossible for anything to live around deep-sea thermal vents. The temperature, the pressure, the toxic chemicals, the complete absence of sunlight. Impossible. And yet, when we finally got down there and looked, we found entire ecosystems. Creatures thriving in conditions we thought were lethal. Life had found a way, using chemistry we didn't even know was possible. So who knows? Maybe somewhere in the mantle's convection currents, in the strange high-pressure chemistry of flowing rock, intelligence has found a way we haven't imagined yet. Maybe they are down there right now, as patient as stones, as enduring as the planet itself. Or maybe they are not. Maybe it really is just us, and the microbes and the molten rock, and the vast, slow dance of tectonic plates. Maybe when we imagine civilizations in the depths, we are really just talking to ourselves, trying to work out what it means to be conscious in a universe that seems so indifferent to consciousness. But you know what? That's beautiful too. The fact that we keep asking these questions, keep pushing our imagination into impossible places, keep wondering about forms of existence completely unlike our own. That curiosity, that openness to mystery, that's something worth celebrating. Most of our planet remains unexplored. We've mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of our own ocean floors. We've sent signals to distant galaxies while barely scratching the surface of the world beneath our feet. There are entire realms of reality that remain completely unknown to us. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. Maybe the mystery itself is part of what makes existence beautiful. When children ask about monsters under the bed, we tell them there's nothing to be afraid of down there. But maybe we should also tell them there's everything to wonder about. The deep, the dark, the unknown, these aren't just sources of fear. They are sources of possibility. And in the end, isn't that what the idea of mantle civilizations really gives us? Not answers, but better questions. Not certainty, but a richer sense of what might be possible. Not knowledge, but wisdom about the limits of our knowledge. We started this journey by standing on solid ground and realizing it wasn't solid at all. We end it by embracing the uncertainty, the mystery, the beautiful unknown that exists not just in distant stars, but right here, beneath our feet. The deep is calling to us, just as we are calling to it. And in that calling, in that reaching across vast differences in environment and time, and ways of being, there's something profoundly beautiful about the possibility of connection. Whether there's anyone down there listening or not, we keep calling. We keep wondering. We keep imagining. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. The eternal pull of the deep unknown, drawing us always toward questions bigger than ourselves. The mantle keeps its secrets. And we keep dreaming of what those secrets might be. And in that dance between mystery and curiosity, between the known and the unknowable, something beautiful is always happening. Something worth preserving. Something worth celebrating. Something worth wondering about for as long as humans walk on this thin crust we call home, floating above the vast, warm, mysterious heart of our planet.